And Minnesota's federal chief judge also saying the Trump administration is ignoring a growing number of court orders involving detained immigrants.
He had threatened to potentially hold the nation's top ICE official in contempt if the agency did not immediately free a man from Ecuador this week.
Just imagine for a moment. If a government agency ignores a court order, can it still claim to be following the law? It sounds like a hypothetical question from a civics textbook. But in Minnesota today, that question is no longer theoretical. It is real. It is unfolding in real time. A federal judge has lost his patience.
Let's bring in Fox 9 investigator Paul Bloom on this one. So, Paul, it sounds like this immigrant has been released from ICE custody, but it seems clear the chief judge here is frustrated.
Yes, Simone Kelsey, Chief Judge Patrick Schiltz acknowledged what he demanded in his order was, quote, extraordinary, potentially ordering the top ICE official in Washington, D.C. to come to his Minnesota courtroom to answer to contempt allegations over the release of that immigrant from Ecuador who was supposed to be sent home last week. As you mentioned, we now understand he has been released, which likely means no hearing on Friday, but that isn't official on the court docket just yet.
And this time, he has directly challenged the government. This is not simply a story about immigration policy. It is a story about power versus accountability, about who enforces the law, about who answers to the law, a courtroom, a federal agency, and a constitution being put to the test. Minnesota, normally a quiet American state, is now at the center of a national storm. And it all began with one name, Juan T.R. But before we go deeper, here's something important. If you want real stories that mainstream media often skips, stories hidden behind official statements and polished press releases, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. Because on this channel, we look beyond headlines. We look at what institutions do, not just what they say. Now, back to Minnesota.
But it's important here to take a look at what Judge Schiltz wrote to better understand this court's frustration with the Trump administration not complying with federal habeas orders, releasing detained immigrants, or at the very least providing them bond hearings in immigration court. Here's what he had to say, quote, "This court has been extremely patient with respondents," meaning the government, even though respondents decided to send thousands of agents to Minnesota to detain aliens without making any provision for dealing with the hundreds of habeas petitions and other lawsuits that were sure to result.
So, Paul, I understand that you sat in on one of the habeas hearings yesterday where a federal judge was frustrated by all of these delays in the government responding to his orders.
Yeah, Kelsey, I did. Interesting case. The federal judge there ordered the immediate and unconditional release of a Mexican immigrant who has a valid visa in this country for another 2 years. The judge contemplated a contempt finding after the man's release was delayed, and then immigration enforcement officials kept hold of some of his key papers, including his driver's license and work permit. After that hearing yesterday, I had a chance to ask Department of Justice attorneys and a top local ICE administrator what was going on. You guys got very close to a contempt finding today. How overwhelmed is ICE, sir? We haven't heard from you guys on the ground here. You can see there, no comment from any of the three. I'll have much more on my attempts to get answers.
Juan was a father, a construction worker. He had lived in Minnesota for 6 years. No violent criminal record, no history of serious offenses, a quiet life, work, family, routine. Then one morning, ICE agents arrived. A knock at the door, an arrest. No dramatic chase, no violent resistance. Just a man taken away and placed into a detention center. There, Juan made one simple request to the court. "Hear me. Give me a bond hearing." A federal judge ordered that he receive that hearing within 7 days. 7 days passed, then 8, then 9. Juan was still in a cell. No hearing, no explanation. And that delay sparked something far bigger than a scheduling oversight. It sparked a constitutional confrontation. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, if a court order can be ignored once, what stops it from being ignored again? And if court orders lose their force, what happens to the idea of rule of law itself? To understand how this happened, we need to step back. During the Trump administration's second term, immigration enforcement entered a new phase. Officials called it Operation Metro Surge. The mission was clear: rapid raids, mass detentions, fast deportation pipelines. Thousands of federal agents were deployed across targeted states. Minnesota became one of the key focus points. There was a plan for raids, a plan for detention, a plan for media messaging. But what about a plan for the court system? There was none. Thousands of arrests followed. Hundreds of habeas corpus petitions were filed. Courts were suddenly flooded. Judges were overwhelmed. Clerks were buried in paperwork. And in the middle of this legal storm stood Chief Judge Patrick J. Schiltz. Judge Schiltz is not a political firebrand. He is conservative. He was appointed by Republicans. He has no reputation as an activist judge. That matters. Because when a judge like this raises the alarm, it carries weight across the legal spectrum. In January, he issued multiple orders. Provide bond hearings. Follow due process. Detention without a hearing is unacceptable. Clear instructions. Direct language. Weeks passed. The orders were ignored. Finally, he wrote, "This court has been extremely patient, but violations continue." The meaning was simple. Arrests were planned. Justice was not. And his patience was running out. Now here is a critical question. When a judge publicly declares that a federal agency is violating court orders, what happens next? In most systems around the world, that is where real institutional crisis begins. Juan's case became the last straw. Judge Schiltz ordered that ICE's acting director, Todd Lyons, must personally appear in court. Summoning the head of a federal agency before a judge is rare, powerful, almost unheard of. The judge wrote, "The extent of ICE's violation of court orders is extraordinary. Extraordinary violation. Extraordinary response." With that sentence, the judiciary had formally accused the executive branch of ignoring binding court authority. Now ask yourself, would any government willingly allow its top enforcement official to sit under oath in open court to explain defiance of a judge? Or would it find another way out? At the same time, another crisis was unfolding on Minnesota's streets. A second reported death occurred during immigration raids. Videos went viral. Public outrage erupted. Protesters filled the streets. State officials demanded explanations. The White House came under growing pressure. President Trump responded by appointing border czar Tom Homan to take direct control of Minnesota's operations. Existing commanders were pushed aside. New directives issued. The message was clear: double down. But here's the irony. The more enforcement expanded on the ground, the more attention shifted toward the courts. And judges were no longer just issuing orders. They were demanding compliance. Judge Schiltz gave ICE a choice: release the detainee or bring the ICE director to court. Days later, reports confirmed Juan had been released. The court appearance was canceled. Technically, the government complied. But symbolically, the court had won. The executive branch blinked first. Now here's another question worth asking. When a government changes its action not because it agrees with the court, but because it wants to avoid testifying under oath, is that compliance or damage control? And just when it seemed this confrontation had peaked, the story took a deeper and more serious turn. Whistleblowers exposed an internal ICE memo. The memo allowed agents to enter homes using administrative warrants, without a warrant signed by a federal judge. This is not a minor procedural detail. The Fourth Amendment is one of the core protections in American constitutional law. It states that entering a home requires authorization from a neutral judge. The Supreme Court has repeated this principle for decades. A home is a person's castle. Citizen or migrant, any person is protected by the Constitution. Legal experts reacted with shock. Civil rights organizations raised alarms. New lawsuits were filed. And suddenly, the picture became much larger than Juan's case. We were now looking at an agency accused of ignoring court orders and rewriting constitutional search protections at the same time. Ask yourself, if an agency can ignore judges and reinterpret constitutional limits internally, where does oversight end and unchecked power begin? This is why Judge Schiltz wanted ICE leadership under oath. This was never just about one detainee. This was about the system itself. Social media reaction exploded. Some voices warned, if ICE can ignore court orders, the rule of law is in danger. Others argued, strong borders require strong action. Two Americas, one courtroom, two competing realities. Now let's ask another question. When a nation becomes divided over whether court orders should be obeyed, what does that say about the health of its democracy? America's system is built on balance. The executive enforces. The judiciary checks. The legislature funds. Each branch limits the others. When the executive ignores judicial orders, it is no longer just a policy dispute. It becomes a constitutional collision. History has seen this before. The Nixon era, Guantanamo detention battles, travel ban litigation. Each time, the question was the same. Who ultimately has the final say over the law? Minnesota is now the next chapter in that long historical chain. But beyond legal documents, court filings, and memos, there is a real human cost. Families wait outside detention centers. Children are separated from parents. Jobs are lost. Lives are put on hold. Communities are disrupted. The judge wrote, "Many detainees have lawfully lived and worked in the United States for years and done absolutely nothing wrong." Judicial language is rarely emotional, so when such words appear in a court order, the system pays attention. Now, another question. How many more cases like Juan's exist that never make headlines? How many families wait in silence while institutions debate procedure? So what happens next? In the short term, courts will enforce stricter compliance. Judges will issue clearer deadlines. Agencies will face tighter monitoring. In the medium term, congressional inquiries may begin. Whistleblower protections may expand. Agency leadership may face internal and external pressure. In the long term, the Supreme Court is likely to step in to define the limits of administrative warrants and to establish a new balance between immigration enforcement and judicial oversight. And politically, the narrative has already shifted. This is no longer framed only as a border crisis. It is increasingly framed as a question of constitutional accountability. But at its core, this story is not really about immigration. It is about one fundamental question. Can power survive viewers' trust without accountability? Can any institution remain legitimate if it appears to stand above the law? The judge in Minnesota gave a clear answer, no. And for the first time, the government blinked. Yet this confrontation is far from over. Policies are being challenged in court. Future rulings are pending. The Supreme Court's door is about to be knocked. And when that door opens, America will once again decide, will power follow the law, or will the law follow power? And now, I want to ask you directly, do you think courts should have the final authority over government agencies? Or do you believe aggressive enforcement justifies bending procedural rules? Where do you personally draw the line between security and constitutional rights? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, because these questions affect not just policy, but the future shape of democratic institutions. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because we'll continue bringing you stories that often stay buried beneath official narratives and political talking points. This story is not over. This is only the beginning.